Thank you, Mr. President. Members, the blackout bill that we have before us tonight puts extreme liberal ideology first and Minnesota families and businesses last. We had dozens of amendments tonight to the bill that Republicans brought to try to make it into a bill that might even be able to work and that considered the needs of Minnesota families and Minnesota businesses. And like bills before it in this legislative session, brought forward by the extreme Democrats, every single one was dismissed. And we're seeing that in both houses. Members, I know there has not been a single conference committee that has met yet. Not one. Because the design is they are ramming forward their radical agenda to not take a single amendment so that they can most expeditiously dispatch of the liberal agenda as early in the session as possible. And we are seeing that, Mr. President, with this bill. Mr. President, the majority here wouldn't even take an amendment to study advanced energy options. The head in the sand in search of their extreme ideologically driven agenda approach is wrong-headed and wrong for the people of Minnesota. We even learned when they ran out of excuses for dismissing these amendments that the answer boiled down to, we're not going to take your amendment because it changes the wording in the bill. Well, members, Mr. President, people of Minnesota, when you bring an amendment, it changes the wording in the bill. That's how amendments work. Now, there's been research done on this bill to take a look at what it might impact. And it was mentioned, it's 5 or 6 degrees below zero right now. It was down to the teens and 20s below zero last month. We're in February now. It was January then. The research I read suggests that if this is implemented in this state, that in January of 2040, we could expect a 55-hour blackout. 55-hour blackout. How, members, does that help the people of Minnesota? This bill is horrible for the people and businesses of Minnesota. As Senator Nelson mentioned, $3,888, nearly $4,000 in cost per household. That this bill is a regressive tax upon. Members, advocates of the bill, and even you liberal activists outside beating your drum, who's going to pay for that? Who's going to reimburse those households? What your policy will do to hurt the grandpas and grandmas out there, the poor grandpas and grandmas that can't afford the $4,000 per household per year. What are you going to do about that? The poor single moms out there, another $3,888 per year for them. In pursuit of your wide-eyed agenda, how are you going to pay for that? Who's going to reimburse them for that? What about the poor kids of poor families? And what this radical, extreme Democrat agenda is going to do to them and their inability to afford life because of this extreme, radical Democrat bill. And what about the blackouts, the rolling blackouts? When the first school in Minnesota goes cold and dark, who can they call? Do we give them Senator France's phone number? When the first nursing home in Minnesota goes cold and dark, who can we call? Who can they call? There's no one. It's passed into law. And the lights are out. It's dark. And very, very cold. When the first hospital in Minnesota goes cold and dark, and people are waiting for their heart surgeries or their biopsies or whatever it is that they're doing, who are they going to call? There's no one. As soon as this radical, extreme Democrat agenda is passed, the costs and the unreliability that this bill inherently contains are going to be passed upon the poor people of Minnesota and laid in their lap to rest. And the people here pushing the bill by then may not even be in elected office anymore. Members, Mr. President, it's time to retire this bill. And it's time to protect Minnesota from the extreme Democrat agenda that will leave nothing other than Minnesota to be a cold, dark California. Thank you, Mr. President.